Yeah, there was, I had won a competition in Switzerland, and so we had a few bucks from that competition, and we were trying to decide whether we should go back to Vancouver or not. I was working with a firm centered in Lugano, but we worked all over Switzerland and Italy, and of course my heart was in Italy. Then I got a phone call from Arthur Erickson. It was a letter. It was a letter from Arthur saying, you know, we've won this competition, please come back. You know, and he had hosted a party for me when I'd won the Pilkington Fellowship, and it was a very nice letter. But within about a week or less, I got a second letter from the head of the school, Henry Elder, and who was new. The school was new. They'd moved, and Henry said, if you're thinking of coming back, talk to me first. I want you to teach. And I said, you know, I'm just like a graduate student. I'm hardly a teacher. And he said, that's what we want. We want young people. So what happened was, one thing led to another. We flipped a coin, and we tried to make a decision. It was going to be Florence, Lugano, or Vancouver. We flipped a couple of coins. Vancouver won.
Well, we're the Florence of the Lower Mainland.
Vancouver beat Florence. Anyway, you know, it's also coming home. And so we moved back to Vancouver, and I was working with Jeff and Arthur in that competition for that university, and at the same time, I was teaching at UBC. Everybody had two jobs in those days to survive. But the interesting thing was Henry Elder, the director, said, well, you know, I said, what do I do? And he said, well, work it out with Arthur, but you can work in the same studio with him. And so you can do two things at once, so to speak. And to me, it was great because I loved working with Arthur, and the school put up with this nonsense. So we had a pretty good design studio. And so, you know, comes day one was around the corner in September, time to get to work. And, you know, what do we do? Where's Arthur? So I phoned Jeff. I said, where the hell's Arthur? I mean, you're gonna start school. He said, well, I told him to phone you. So I waited. The phone came, he called, and he said, great, we'll work together. We have to do the first problem. And I said, I have to do? He said, yeah, you have to do the first problem. I said, but I need you. He said, no, you do the first problem. We're gonna do Sufi work, Sufi education. And I shared a bit of that when I was a student, and Arthur understood that, I understood it, I understood what it meant. And I said, well, you want me to write the problem? He said, yes. And I said, well, you know, this is Arthur, right? He's the master. And he said, no, you write the problem. I said, well, where are you? He said, Peru. That's the beginning of the story of working with Arthur. Could be anywhere, anytime. Anyway, it all worked out.
Now, Bruno, a lot of people don't know that Erickson Massey did the master plan, the overall scheme and the strategy. And then individual buildings were parceled out to other firms. So you were in a very interesting position because you had to deal with other architects, et cetera, trying to implement the scheme, being true to the master vision, but also giving some latitude to other architects. Do you want to say anything about that process?
Yeah, that's one of the roles. It already won the competition, but you will hear about various television shows. But Jeff and Arthur basically threw away the program provided for the university, and instead of 5 buildings, the scheme that won, that captured the Gordon Schrumm's heart, was this single big building, of which other buildings are part, but that's just the physical picture. What's important about it is that Arthur, and this is part of the genius of Arthur, that not many people talk about, and I'm talking about kind of a physical literacy that he has, and a very profound social understanding. So he brought forward, for example, in this competition, the idea that a university is not just a collection of buildings representing disciplines, like UBC, like most universities in North America. And, you know, the Oxbridge model was the one that he'd studied and brought that forward. Now, I had worked on a couple of competitions in Europe, and Europe has this very profound tradition in breaking down the silos of disciplines, which is very popular today. So Simon Fraser University, and the genius of Arthur Erickson, was to take an idea like, we would say, interdisciplinary work or a university, and the idea of the city as one thing, and that everything can work together, and we separate things for various reasons. So we can argue about that, but it's a very profound model for a university. And Gordon Shrum loved it. He loved the idea, but you can't talk to very many people about that. Gordon's job, of course, was now to hire a bunch of deans, and what they do is build their own fortress, their own silo, their own discipline. That's what usually happens. He got across the idea that it's one thing, and there's a way to deal with the necessary differences. So Simon Fraser University was really a classic example of a very profound social, intellectual idea, which is very strong today, and a physical, poetic interpretation of that idea. And that sketch you saw of the mountaintop and the mall along, and there's a long story about all of that, but it really represents a physical, poetic interpretation of how you create a community of scholarship. That's step one. But step two, which is even another set of the Erickson genius, was that a university really is a city. It is not something different and should be integrated. So Simon Fraser, in its origin, was really, it cut across the issue of disciplines and the usual silos that come from that, and establishing an urban civic core. So you have an environment called a town with a great central space called the mall, which anything can happen. A little funny story about that. Trying to get that idea across to a board of governors is not a simple thing. And Arthur is a genius, but he didn't like confrontation. So he would set the problem and then escape. And we had to...
Leaving you.
Leaving a few of us to fight the bloody battle. And I can always remember Dr. Shrum. You know, he looked at me and he said, "Can I give a lecture under that roof?" That's the roof over the main mall. And nobody had asked me that question. I didn't know where it was going, but way in the back of the room, near the exit door from a big boardroom was Arthur, ready to sneak out. He looked back in and said, "Say yes." So I said yes.
Now you see the magic of architecture in action. It's nothing to do with 6B pencils, it's that sort of thing. Now, Bruno, you've had an amazing career. You did the master plan for Expo 86, the good master plan that would have given the city a legacy, overturned for political reasons. However, your what we now call Science World is a Bruno Freschi design. You went off then to become Dean of Architecture at SUNY Buffalo, and did great things in Buffalo to promote their heritage and their industrial landscape. And then end up at Canon Design in a very large firm in Washington, D.C. But what I'd like you to close with, Bruno, is I think my favorite building of yours, of course, is the Ismaili Jamakhana in Burnaby. If you haven't seen it, it's one of the architectural wonders of the Lower Mainland, the garden and the prayer hall together. Could you just tell us briefly how studying under Arthur or working under him, is there any legacy from Arthur in that project?
Having worked with Arthur and having absorbed his influences, you can see it in the houses that I've done, etc. But yeah, there is a legacy. The legacy really is that it's first of all, it's a spiritual building, and what I got fundamentally from Arthur was that really architecture, to reach people, it has to reach people at a spiritual plane. All buildings should. Many do, but negatively, because most buildings are really bloody awful. So the thing that I got was with the Jamakhana, first of all, I had a client, the Aga Khan, who's a brilliant man, and I accused him of being an architect in hiding, and he didn't like that, but he accepted it as a compliment. He has a profound understanding of space. And the reason I won the commission was that I flew to Paris and talked about spiritual space. I didn't talk about buildings, and that's why I got the commission. That idea, like when you say spiritual space, is embedded in Arthur's work. Mm-hmm. And Arthur constantly had, other than the immediate mundane needs of doing a building, many of them leak, we know that, those are the mundane issues. There was always a higher aesthetic statement, a higher aesthetic challenge. So with the Jamakhana, I said, this has got to be a building. It's got to be absolutely perfect in all its, and absolutely finished. That is, it doesn't have something that says it's going to grow this way or that way or up or down. And that once you go in to the building, you leave the building behind. That's the spiritual quality. So I got that from the Sufi understanding in my studies and working with Arthur, that you try to elevate all things to a spiritual level. And the spiritual level is the awe effect that we all experienced. You see a great waterfall or a great building or a great space, you're left in awe, A-W-E. So it's capturing and projecting that. And I think spiritual space has to do that.
Well, Bruno, I think you've lifted us in spirit here tonight with those words. What an honor it is to have both of you here, representative of the Erickson family, who's working 24/7 to keep the memory alive and extend it to the public, And Bruno, what a delight to have you here on stage, someone who helped make this happen, who kept a friendship and relationship with Arthur your whole career, and has done amazing things on your own. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.